Hi, welcome to Blueprints to Buildings. I'm your host, Glen Palmer, and on this show, we interview the movers and shakers in the world of property and development and real estate. Now, before we dive in, just a very quick show note is we are supported by something that very few developers have quietly been using to get their projects funded and sold faster. Now, that is without touching traditional 3D modules. It's early, it's clever, and it's changing how people see off-plan properly. I'll leave it there, but if you're curious, message me on LinkedIn at Glen Palmer Online or check out the show notes below. Now, today I am joined by David Johnson. Now, he is the founder and the CEO of Gingerbread Homes. Now, he is blending sustainable design, robotics, 3D CAD, and AI-driven manufacturing to create affordable, efficient housing for urban, rural, and off-grid communities globally. David, thank you very much for coming on the show. I think this is going to be extremely interesting, and I can't wait to explore what we have to unpack here. So let's just crack on, get into it, right, shall we?
Okay,
So,
thank you.
David, very first question. Now, if time travel became a reality, and you actually had the chance to go back in time to when you first started your career, what advice would the person you are now actually tell your younger self?
Stay the course. You know,
Yeah.
when you're younger and you see um, you see problems that are out there that need to be solved, um, you don't just apathetically go on and live with the problem, but hopefully, and I think that was my goal was, to stay tenacious and to try and figure out how we could resolve the problems in the residential housing industry.
Hmm.
So that's what I'd say to myself, just stay the course. It'll eventually what is good and right and what is the most efficient, the best, the highest quality, the best in budget. All those things are certainly, no question, doable. But we've just got even better tools now to do it
Yeah.
than when I was a kid thinking on those things.
Yeah. And I mean, technology has changed that much when I think about even going back just to the 80s where there was, VHS and Betamax, and look at it now. Now we've got Netflix. So yeah, I can see where you're coming from. Definitely stay the course. I wish I told my younger self to stay the course. I would be a lot further along down the line if I did that. But David, one of the most fascinating things that I find about you is that you grew up on a Navajo reservation, and you've worked across tribal and international communities. So, how did that knowledge and how did that upbringing shape your mission for Gingerbread Homes?
Well, I think what it taught me, Glenn, was it taught me that it doesn't matter what situation we're in or the setting or the culture or anything along those lines. There are some basics of life that just cannot be ignored. And growing up with my Navajo friends, um, most of them at that time were living in hogans. That's the name of it's an uh, octagonal house that's just one room, but that's what they lived in. And when I go and visit them at their homes and such, there was never any this condescending, well, you live in this and I live in that and whatever else. I didn't live in anything much better because most of the housing on the Navajo reservation was at least, um, I didn't know at the time, but looking back, it was substandard. It was almost like being in a third world country
Hmm.
in a first world country. I mean, we're talking about Arizona, the United States, and we should be a little more ahead of ourselves. But it was a typical situation where I could have been in any other third world country around the world and seen what problems were presented there. I mean, they had to haul their water. They had no bathroom facilities. They had Hogan is just a dirt floor, and it has mud in between as chinking in between the logs, and it has a hole in the roof so they can have a fire pit in the middle of it to warm it up because it was, so that was the housing that most Navajos lived in at that time. And so from that perspective, it really helped me to recognize that there are three basic needs in life: food, clothing, and shelter. And so I started getting into the shelter end of things. My dad was more into um, the food end of things, helping with their agricultural needs there on the Navajo reservation. And so that's what he was doing. But I'll just share one little success story that he had working in a third world environment. The Navajos at the time didn't think they could grow anything else in that semi-arid desert area, which is very similar, by the way, to the land and the aridness of Israel. And
Yeah.
so and that's where drip irrigation got its start, was actually in Israel back in the 1960s. So my dad was trying to bring some of these things to the forefront, to the awareness of the Navajos, so that they could see that they could grow more than just corn and squash because they had no irrigation. So
Yeah.
he introduced irrigation to them, and the way it worked was each Navajo family was allotted 10 acres of land. And this was a problem because there was no way he was going to be able to help them move beyond this micro way of managing 10 acres to something bigger unless they set up some kind of a co-op. So
Yeah.
that's what he did. He got 20 to 25 families. They had a meeting, and they all said, yeah, let's all cooperate together. And in and so as a result, what was able to happen was, instead of going and trying buying a tractor and a grain or a drill, a seed drill, and a cultivator, those kinds of things for each family, you could just buy one of each of those, and it would service 200 acres. So we had 20 families that were interested, each with their 10 acres. They pulled their resources all together, and now they had 200 acres, which justified going and getting. He got a grant through Ford Foundation, and they were able to go and come up with the money for a tractor and a drill and a cultivator and so forth. A great success story, because what ended up happening in the first year, they were growing watermelon, radishes, corn, all sorts of things that they'd never grown there before. And they witnessed it firsthand that, oh, we can grow more here. We just have to introduce some water into this situation and a few nutrients in the ground, and we'll grow anything. By
Mm.
year three, they were commercially growing cucumbers, which were sold to a pickling factory about 2 hours away. And so this was all the stuff my dad lined up to help facilitate this. He was the facilitator of the project. He brought a university in with some expertise, some volunteers that were farmers and retired. Like he kind of pulled this all together. But the bottom line is, a co-op works in third world countries.
Mm.
And so this is part of what I'm about, is trying to go and say, all right, affordable housing, yes, we can keep talking about that until we're blue in the face. But until we actually do some things that will economically make sense in third world countries, then we're never going to be able to move that forward even in first world countries,
Yeah.
because we don't have that cooperative mentality in so many cases in first world countries. I mean, government isn't working with the locals, and everyone's going down their little path, and the builders are doing their thing, and everyone's got their little silo that they've established, and so there's no synergistic approach to it. So for this actually to work, we can throw all the technology we want at this, but we have got to be able to go and have at least some driving input from the banking industry that lends the money to the government that, says, oh, here's the codes, you got to follow these and blah, blah, blah. All
Mm,
that together has to work, and builders have to cooperate and say, well, okay, let's see how we can make this work and move beyond status quo.
yeah. So building onto that, affordable quality housing, in my opinion, is a global issue. No matter where you are, affordable housing is a global issue. Now, how does your cooperative, robot-assisted factory model actually drive down cost and improve the quality?
Great question, Glenn. You know, I had a a friend of mine who's a contractor tell me this one day. He says, our biggest challenge in the construction industry is two things: labor and safety, period. And if you look
Yeah.
up the industry stats, it's apparent. It's one of the most unsafe industries in the world. Um, you know, the construction industry has had issues with this for decades. Okay. So the human element, and then he also made the point, he says, you know, even if we go assembly line, he says the problem on a Monday morning is you're going to have a guy show up, you're paying $95 an hour union, and he's got a hangover from the weekend.
Yeah.
What kind of
Yeah.
quality of work are you going to have at his part on the modular assembly line, you know? And so that's a real problem. So when you introduce robotics into that assembly line scenario in the offsite or even on the onsite, which by the way, that's another subject because we're really not there yet on the off on the onsite. We're working on the offsite right now, trying to build components and that sort of thing. So, but if
Yeah.
you just take that segment and you say, okay, well, how are these humans going to be able to do a better job than say the industrial robots do on an assembly line in Detroit or in, wherever the plant is set up to build cars? So Henry Ford learned a long time ago you can be a lot more efficient if you just go to the assembly line. Well, that was using humans. And then later on, the car industry caught up with the idea maybe a robot can do a little better job at welding that joint than a human. And you know what? That's true. The
Mhm.
quality behind a robot doing a task and the quality behind a human doing the same task, hey, we're human. And every little weld is going to be a little bit different than the last one if you've got a human doing it. But if you have an industrial robot that's programmed to do that long of a weld over this given area, it's going to be the same every single time. And if you want to improve upon that, you introduce AI into it and machine learning, and you say, okay, let's see if we can find a little more efficient way to do that task, move the arm over here or do this over here. So you can use the tools that we have and get better quality every single day when you go AI robotics.
Yeah. And again, building again on that is, you've built the homes robotically and you've used AI in both design and manufacturing. So what specific parts of the building a house benefit most from robotics and AI?
Well, obviously the customer. Let's go back to we're building product for customers. That's really what we should be doing. And sometimes as builders, we forget that. We get it in our heads that they're lucky to have me show up to build them a house for them,
Yeah.
right? This
Yeah.
arrogant attitude of, I'm the God send all, I'm tired of that. I really am sick and tired of that. We need to look at the customer and say, well, what does the customer really want? They want your floor plan that you've come up with? Maybe not. Maybe we should be looking at who the pen portrait really is here is the customer. They're the ones that should be driving your product. And it hasn't been that way for decades. I don't know if it's ever really been that way unless you get a customized house that somebody in North Hollywood wanted to have built for themselves, then you get whatever it is you wanted. But most folks don't have that luxury. We
No.
can't go and hire an architect and all this other stuff. It's just, okay, what are we going to get out of this deal here? So if we keep in mind the customer first, and we say, okay, well, maybe what we should be doing is we should be building homes that will last, by the insurance company's terms, longer than 25 years before they start writing it down. Or,
Yeah.
the bank starts depreciating it because, well, it is a 25-year-old structure. It's got drywall, it's got wood members in it. They all, decay, and it's got, these issues with it. We should be building homes that last 100 years. That's my personal opinion.
Yeah.
And we should be building them out of different substrates. I've worked in the construction industry for decades, and I never quite understood why in the world we're still using drywall. I mean, that's plaster. That's what they used to use back in the 1700s. They used lath and plaster. That's how you made your walls. And
Yeah.
all drywall is a modern version of that with paper and some chalk in the middle. It's really all it is. And so, which I mean, it's served us well, I guess, to a certain point. But if you're ever mad on a given day, you can put your fist right through that
Yeah.
drywall. I've seen it. And so it's not something that lasts a long time. And it's not water permeable and those kinds of things. So what I'm proposing, and by the way, I'm a startup in the pre-funding stage, so we're a work in progress. But what
Yeah.
we're working on is a substrate like this. It's SIP panels made of polycarbonate and steel, and it's bolted together. It's not fastened with fasteners, one-time fasteners. It's bolted together. So theoretically, you could unbolt the whole structure and move it if you
Yeah.
had, which is it takes it into a different level of investment. So investments become the house that is movable to a new site. And it's not all related to the real estate end of things. We tie homes directly to the real
Wow.
estate and we say, well, it's worth this because of where it's sitting. It's sitting in, by this lakeshore or on this mountaintop. That's the value of it, is because it's location, location, location. Whereas we don't look at our cars that way. Our cars go with us. If we move, our cars go with us. If we invested in a home we really love and it lasts 100 years and it's off grid, it's got all this wonderful stuff on it, and we want to keep it, we just hire the company that robotically assembled it on site to come back and re-engineer it and unassemble it, put it in shipping containers, move it to the new site. Now we're talking about customer service at a new level, totally new level, because now we're thinking about the customer first and not ourselves. We're not thinking about,
Yeah.
all this other stuff that goes along with, well, I have to buy this house because it's closest to my work. I hate the thing, but that's what I got to live in, right? I mean, those kinds of things are just not customer driven.
Yeah.
We
And it's
lost that.
it's crazy because I sort of, I watch these programs and there's a program in England called A Place in the Sun. And it's basically where they get people to that want to have a holiday home in either Spain or somewhere nice and sunny, with the end goal to eventually retire out there. And the amount of times I have heard, I love this house, but if it was over in this location, it would be perfect. And what you're actually trying to sort of do is say, well, yes, you can actually do that. If you wanted the perfect home, all you had to do is buy a plot of land that you really fall in love with the views and everything, and you can take your house and you can plonk it there. I think that is phenomenal. Um,
You
I
remember the
really,
movie Up? Did you
yes,
see the movie Up?
yeah,
Okay. So what did the old guy do? His house was sitting in downtown. The city had grown up around his residential area, and he was the only home left. And so what does? He goes and he gets all these balloons. He lifts his house up, and he takes it to Peru or wherever he was headed in South America, right?
Yeah, yeah.
That's where he wanted to live. That's where he wanted to be. And he figured out a way to do it. We're trying to do the same thing, but we're not using balloons.
Yeah, I love that analogy as well. So you use 3D CAD, and that's pretty central. At what stage do like digital designs become physical builds? And how does that digital to physical workflow improve those outcomes?
Great, great question. So 3D CAD, I started dabbling in it back in the early 80s. Um, Problem was I didn't have a computer that would run AutoCAD, the way it wasn't working.
Yeah.
So it took me years to be able to finally break into that space. Um, what 3D CAD did, and prior to that, I worked in companies that were using 2D CAD to design the floor plan on a two-dimensional basis so that you could take your wall assemblies and all those things and put them on an assembly line, and you could build them out using human labor, and they get the job done. So it was a huge step forward than using traditional blueprints where you left interpretation up to the framer to figure out, well, I know I got to put these studs on 16-inch centers, and so they just do that. But when you went CAD, it was like, okay, we're getting a little more exact here, which is
Mm.
exactly what the industry needed, was to be a little more formal in how we were doing the assembling. And so then 3D came along and said, well, we're going to be able to do a fly through. We're gonna build this in 3D CAD before we ever put it in real time, before we ever do it on the assembly line. And we'll see if ergonomically or human factors wise it makes sense to the occupants. Now, I'm not saying that ever really happened. I'm just saying they just took floor plans and just did it. But
Yeah.
part of the furtherance of this customer service relatedness is to go and say, well, let's really look and see if we can take and stop thinking about space in two-dimensional mindsets, always about square footage. Well, you got to have 2,000 square feet if you're going to live. You can't get by with 250 square feet or this. We're always looking at what's down on the floor. And we don't stop to think about, no, there's actually a three-dimensional approach to this, because now we can go and say, I had a class back when I was working on a master's degree in architecture from University of in North Carolina, and I had this professor that told us patterns, study the patterns, look at the flow in a space, and then design around that.
Mm.
And I thought, yeah, absolutely. We should be looking at space more than just, well, you got 4 bedrooms, a bath, and you label stuff. We're always labeling things. Well, that's a kitchen, and that's a dining room, and this is a family room, and this is, so we label things to give the mindset to the user to say, okay, turn that into a family room. Well, what does that mean? So what 3D CAD does, it takes and puts functionality into spaces we wouldn't normally think you could ever do that. So, for example, on a GB cottage, we go and we don't leave space undefined. And people might say, but I want to, Mama might say, well, I want to move that wall over to here, Mr. Contractor. Can you move that over there and put a window there, by the way? And, it's a custom job every day, right? So what we do at GB, we just say, well, we're introducing 5 floor plans. You got to pick one of those 5, or go down the road and find someone else to build your house for them, because we just build these 5 floor plans, and that's it. When we go and we say, in one of those 5 floor plans, or all of them, we have defined space for you. The beds are built into the walls. The dressers are built into the walls. There's built-in everything. The dining room, all of it's built in. So you don't have to go and buy furniture. You don't have to go and buy the bed. It's all there. So you're set and ready to go. If you're a young family moving into an affordable house and you don't have to buy any furniture. Hallelujah. That's a pretty good deal,
Mm,
eh? Thinking of the
yeah,
customer again. And so 3D allows us to look at things cubically. So cubic space becomes really critical. You can build in shelves. And by the way, this isn't anything new. I mean, Frank Lloyd Wright built everything in. Look at some of his stuff. He was always building things into the walls. So it was a function of the room. The room became the library because it had built-in bookshelves or whatever. I'm just using that
yeah,
as an example. So what 3D did and does for us now could have never been done 40 years ago.
yeah.
We weren't
And,
thinking of it that way. Now we are.
and then moving on from that, we have now in an age where you've got 3D walkthrough, immersive walkthroughs where you can actually see the plants moving, see the fireplace crackling, having that visualization aspect. How important do you think that that is towards the new generation of builders, of how the visualization is giving a clearer picture? And not only a clearer picture, but bringing all the stakeholders together. How important do you think that is in today's market?
I think it's a game changer. I use AI to go and I'll put a description together and I'll plug it into AI and I'll say, okay, I want a Gaudi motif. I want to have it on, this amount of space. I want this look. I want, these components, and I want it to have all this functionality. And it will spit me out some pretty cool stuff.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah,
I mean, within a matter of 30 seconds, I can have a prototype ready to go and I can show it to somebody and say, what do you think about that, eh? And they go, look at, that's cool. I said, yeah. Well, that is a game changer. That's a huge game changer for this stuffy, I don't know how to label it. I'll just say the primitive way of building a house.
yeah,
You compare it
yeah,
to where we've been with all this, and now we're looking at and saying, maybe we should break out of our mindset. And I think that's the biggest, hugest problem that we have to overcome in the industry. And I'm talking about the residential housing industry specifically. But
hmm
we've got to start going and thinking about how to build something without getting caught in the minutia of going and saying, you know, well, I can't do that because the code says I can't, and then whatever the code says, well, fine, fine. We'll work that out. If you're manufacturing something like a car, you don't have the building inspector in the city of San Francisco that says, well, according to code, you really can't be driving that particular car here because it doesn't meet code. And who cares? It was built by Toyota in Japan and it meets these criteria.
yeah,
So that's good anywhere in the world. If you want to drive a Toyota, anywhere in the world, it met some standard back when it was built at the factory. And that's the way we should be looking at houses too. We should not be beholden to a local guy who's reading the code, interpreting it his way or her way, and then we're beholden to the local person to make our house the way it meets their criteria. Maybe we've got that all backwards. I think we
yeah,
do.
yeah, yeah. Well, David, absolutely loved having you on the show. Really enjoyed the conversation that we had on AI and robotics and how that is shaping not just low-cost housing, but housing across the board. So once again, thanks for my listeners and the viewers on YouTube as well. Now, David, just before we go, if my listeners or viewers want to get in contact with you, learn about what you are offering at Gingerbread Homes, what's the best way for my listeners or viewers to do that?
I would suggest go on LinkedIn, look up my profile, start there. If you do want to reach me, I have no problem giving out my contact information. So you can reach me at DAJohnson16 2000 at gingerbreadhomes.biz.
Excellent.
Or here's my contact number, 403-715-6804. The area code, it would be country code of Canada.
Yeah. Well, excellent. So the listeners know how to get hold of you. Loved what you're doing. This episode was brought to you and supported by PropTech visual platform that is absolutely changing how forward-thinking developers plan, pitch, and sell. Now, it isn't mainstream yet, but it soon will be. If you want to stay ahead of the curve, you know exactly where to find me. So you've been listening to the Blueprints to Buildings podcast. I'm your host, Glen Palmer, and today I had the privilege of being joined by David Johnson. Thanks again for listening, and I'll see you in the next episode.